She woke up every morning before the first light touched the sky, long before the quiet street outside her small room began to stir. The world around her was always dark, but that darkness never scared her. It was all she had ever known, yet she learned how to live inside it gently, listening to the sounds other people often ignored. The soft hum of a ceiling fan, the distant bark of a dog, the whistle of a bus on the main road, even the faint rustle of the neighbor's laundry in the wind. These sounds were her map. They helped her understand where she was and what the day was becoming. Her name was Lena, and though she couldn't see the sun rising, she could feel it. She sensed it in the warmth that slowly touched her face when she stood near her window. She counted those early moments as a quiet blessing. They told her that another day had come, and she had more time to do the things she loved most in the world: play the piano. The piano in her small room was old, the wood fading and the corners chipped. Some keys were stiffer than others, and sometimes the low notes made a strange clicking sound. But none of that mattered to her. To Lena, it was the most beautiful thing she owned. She didn't need it to be perfect. The sound it made when she pressed the keys was enough to fill her heart with something warm, something she couldn't describe with words. It was the only place where she didn't feel limited. When she played, she wasn't blind. She wasn't struggling. She wasn't different. She was just someone who loved music. Her fingers moved over the keys with a kind of softness, as if she were touching something alive. She knew every mark, every scratch, every uneven space between the keys. She didn't need to look to know where she was going. Every morning, she began her day by playing a melody she had learned years ago, one she discovered by accident. She had heard a street musician play it once, right outside the market. The moment the sound reached her ears, she remembered every note. When she returned home that evening, she played it on her piano, slowly at first and fully, as if she had known it all her life. People who knew her often said she had a special gift, something rare. She didn't think much about that. She only knew that sound felt like a language that spoke directly to her heart. She could hear a melody once and carry it forever. Sometimes she wished she could share this part of her more openly, but she also knew not everyone understood her world. Some people felt sorry for her because of her blindness, while others didn't believe she could do anything meaningful with music. Those thoughts used to hurt her when she was younger, but as she grew older, she learned to live with them quietly. Still, there were moments when the doubt slipped in. She wondered if she would ever get the chance to show people that she could be more than what they saw. She wondered if the world would ever hear her play, truly hear her, without judging her first. But she tried to push those thoughts aside because they made her heart heavy. One late morning, when she finished practicing her usual melody, she sat peacefully near her window. A breeze entered the room, carrying the scent of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. She smiled. She knew that smell well. She used to walk past that bakery every day on her way to the community center. The center had a small music room where she occasionally practiced when she needed a change of atmosphere. She liked how the piano there sounded. The tone was clearer, and the keys were smoother. That same afternoon, she overheard two neighbors talking outside her window. They mentioned a famous pianist who was coming to town, someone people had admired for years, someone known for genius and excellence. He was going to hold a master class at the community hall, open to anyone who wanted to watch. Lena paused. A master class. That word echoed in her mind like a soft bell. She had never been to such an event before. She knew that the master class would be filled with people who understood music on a deeper level, people who could see, read notes, watch hand movements, and follow everything visually. She also knew that this pianist was not just famous for his talent, but also for his strict behavior. He had a reputation for being hard to impress, and even harder to approach. Part of her wanted to ignore the whole thing. She could already imagine what the crowd would be like. She would be the only blind person there. People might stare or whisper quietly, wondering why she came. They might think she didn't belong, but another part of her felt a pull, a gentle but strong pull. She thought about what she could learn just by being in the same room where music was being taught at such a high level. She didn't need to play. She didn't need to be on the stage. She just wanted to listen. Listening alone could be enough. That night, as she lay in bed, she kept thinking about the event. Should she go? Should she stay home? Would they treat her kindly? Would someone try to stop her? She turned her head slowly on her pillow, trying to quiet her mind. But the thoughts didn't go away. The next morning, she made her choice. She was going. She dressed in a simple green dress, one she liked because the fabric felt soft against her skin. She tied her hair into a neat bun and took her cane in one hand. Before leaving the house, she placed her fingers on the piano one more time. Just a tiny touch. As if drawing courage from it, the walk to the community hall was familiar. She counted the steps like she always did. She listened to the beeps of crossing signals, the chatter of shopkeepers opening their stores, the steady hum of distant traffic. Each sound reassured her that she was following the right path. When she reached the hall, she felt a wave of nervousness. There were so many people. Their footsteps echoed off the walls, and their voices layered over one another. She stood still for a moment to gather herself. Then she stepped inside. The room was full. She could hear the excitement in people's voices. They talked about the famous pianist, about how strict he was, about how only the most talented musicians could impress him. Some mentioned past students who had walked away in tears after failing to meet his expectations. Lena swallowed hard. She didn't want to draw attention to herself. She only wanted to listen. A gentle voice approached her and asked if she needed help finding a seat. She nodded gratefully. She was guided to the second row, close enough to hear everything, far enough that she wouldn't be in anyone's way. She sat down and folded her cane beside her. Her hands rested in her lap, calm but alert. She could hear the faint tuning of a grand piano on stage. The sound made her smile. There was nothing quite like hearing a perfect instrument being prepared. Soon the room quieted. The famous pianist walked onto the stage, and the audience applauded loudly. His footsteps were sharp and confident, and he cleared his throat before speaking. His voice was deep, carrying the tone of someone used to respect Dot as he introduced himself and described the goals of the masterclass. Lena listened carefully. She imagined what he might look like based on the sound of his voice. Perhaps tall, perhaps with a stern face, maybe wearing something formal. She didn't know that this moment, this simple choice to attend, would change her life more than she ever imagined. She didn't know that the day would begin with calm curiosity and end with something far more emotional. All she knew was that she was sitting in a room filled with music, talent, and possibility, and she felt grateful to be there. She took a slow breath and quietly prepared herself to listen to everything that was about to happen. Unaware that her own journey was just beginning, the room stayed quiet after the famous pianist finished his introduction, as if everyone inside was holding their breath. Lena sat still in her seat, her hands folded in her lap, listening to every small detail around her. She could hear the shifting of clothes as people leaned forward, the soft tapping of shoes on the polished floor, and the faint hum of the ceiling fan overhead. Even without sight, she could sense the weight of the moment. Something inside her felt tense, unsure, yet also excited. The pianist walked toward the grand piano at the center of the stage. His steps were firm, confident, the kind of steps a person takes when they know exactly who they are and what they bring into a room. He sat down, and the audience leaned even closer. Lena felt it, the way the air shifted when everyone placed their attention on one person. He began by playing a short warm-up melody. It wasn't a full piece, just a few flowing notes, but the sound filled the hall like light pouring into a dark space. His hands moved quickly, effortlessly, as if the piano were an extension of him. Even Lena, who could not see, could feel the energy of his playing. His skill was undeniable. People whispered softly, amazed by how easy he made it look. Lena listened closely, following each note in her mind. She could imagine the movement of his fingers, how they glided over the keys, how his hands shifted from low notes to high ones. It was beautiful, even though there was something cold in the way he played, something sharp and distant. When he finished, the audience clapped briefly. He cleared his throat again and began calling volunteers to the stage. He wanted students from the audience to try playing so he could guide them, correct them, or sometimes criticize them. Everyone had heard that he didn't hold back. If he didn't like something, he said it directly. One by one, people went on stage. Some played confidently while others hesitated. Some received polite praise. Some received harsh comments. The pianist did not soften his words for anyone. If someone missed a note, he pointed it out immediately. If someone used the wrong technique, he corrected them sharply. Lena listened carefully to each student. She pictured their playing in her mind, heard the tiny mistakes they made, felt the tension in their breathing. She admired their courage. Standing on a stage in front of a strict master was not an easy thing to do. She didn't plan to go on stage herself. She never even thought about it. She came only to listen and learn. After a while, the pianist asked if there was anyone else who wanted to try. His voice echoed in the hall, strong and challenging. Before Lena could process anything, she heard a voice from behind her, a friendly voice, probably belonging to someone who had noticed her earlier. "Let the girl in the green dress try," the person said. Lena froze. She knew they were talking about her. Her heart skipped. She didn't understand why someone would draw attention to her. She wasn't prepared for this. She didn't want to be on stage under the eyes of so many people. Her fingers tightened around her cane, and she wished she could quietly disappear into the seat. A few people murmured in agreement. Someone else added, "Yes, let her try. She's been listening so closely. Let her play a little." Lena felt the heat rise in her chest. She didn't know whether to stand or stay still. The pianist looked in her direction. She couldn't see his expression, but the pause in his voice told her everything. He wasn't pleased. He didn't like the idea at all. "Is she a student?" he asked bluntly. "No," someone replied. "But she plays beautifully. You should hear her." Lena's breath trembled at those words. She appreciated the kindness, but this wasn't what she came for. She didn't want to be judged in front of a crowd, especially not by someone known for harsh criticism. The pianist sighed, and the sound of his annoyance traveled through the hall. "Very well," he said, though the tone of his voice made it clear that he wasn't expecting much. "If she wishes to try, she may come forward." Lena didn't stand. She kept her hands firmly on her lap. She didn't wish to try. She wished people would stop calling her out. But then the woman sitting beside her leaned closer and whispered gently, "You don't have to be afraid. If you want, I can guide you to the stage." Lena shook her head slightly. "I didn't come to play," she whispered back. The woman nodded softly, respecting her choice, but the audience was still waiting. The pianist, growing impatient, spoke again. "If she doesn't want to, that's fine," he said. "There's no need to force someone who isn't prepared." His voice carried a tone that stung, a tone that suggested she wasn't capable, a tone that wasn't just dismissive, but almost insulting. A tiny hush fell across the room. Lena felt it deeply. She felt every unspoken thought from the crowd. Maybe she can't play. Maybe she's too scared. Maybe she doesn't belong here. Asterisk, her fingers twitched. Her chest tightened. She didn't like attention, but something inside her hated the sound of his voice just then, not because he didn't think she was skilled, but because he assumed she had nothing to offer. Before she could change her mind, her body moved on its own. She stood. The room shifted. Her quiet movement created a ripple of silence. The woman beside her stood up too, offering her arm without a word. Lena held it and took a steady breath. The walk to the stage felt longer than it truly was. Every footstep echoed in her ears. Her heart thumped so loudly she could almost hear it. When she reached the stage, she let go of the woman's arm and used her cane to find the small step. The pianist's voice reached her again. "Be careful," he said, though not kindly. "This stage is not easy to walk on if you're not trained." There it was, the first cut. He didn't say it directly, but everyone heard the meaning behind his words. Lena felt it like a cold wind against her skin. A soft whisper ran through the crowd. She ignored it. She focused on the piano instead. She could sense it. She didn't need to see it. The smell of polished wood, the faint warmth of the stage lights heating the surface. She could feel her way to it. She reached the piano and touched the side lightly with her fingertips. The audience waited. The pianist stood nearby, arms crossed. "Play something simple," he said. "Anything, you know." Lena nodded. She sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She didn't choose a song. Her fingers simply found the melody that lived deepest in her heart, the one she always played at home before sunrise. She pressed the first key. The sound floated gently into the quiet room. Soft, warm, careful, she continued, her fingers moving lightly across the piano. She played without rushing, letting her emotions guide her. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot she was being watched. She forgot the cold voice standing beside her. But when she finished, the silence wasn't warm. The pianist let out a small, dismissive sigh. It cut through the air like a blade. "That was fine," he said, "but very basic. You need more than memory to play real music. You need control, precision, expression. You need to understand the technique. Music is not just touching keys. It is seeing the notes, understanding the structure, noticing the details." He paused, and the next words came colder. "And unfortunately, you cannot do that. You lack what is needed." The room stiffened. Even people who admired him felt uneasy. Lena sat frozen on the bench. She didn't respond. She didn't show anger. She didn't show hurt. She only listened, letting his words sink into her slowly. The pianist continued speaking, unaware of how deep his words landed. "This is a masterclass," he said firmly, "not a place to experiment. If you wish to learn properly, you must accept your limitations." Lena lowered her hands from the keys. For a moment, everything inside her felt small, fragile, like a thin piece of glass that could break from the slightest pressure. She stood up slowly from the bench. She reached for her cane. She wanted to leave the stage quietly, without making a scene. But then something unexpected happened. A young man in the back row raised his voice. "Let her try something harder," he called out. "Let her play the piece you played at the beginning." A murmur spread across the hall. The pianist stiffened. "That piece is far beyond her level," he replied, sharply. "But you haven't even given her the chance," the young man insisted. More voices joined. "Let her try. Give her a real shot. What's the harm?" Lena stood still. She felt the air in the room changing, shifting toward her. She didn't ask for this. She didn't want any more attention. But she also didn't want to walk off that stage carrying the weight of his judgment. Her hands trembled. Her breath felt unsteady. But slowly, She turned back toward the piano bench. The pianist watched her with disbelief. "Do you truly want to attempt it?" he asked, a strange mix of irritation and curiosity in his voice. Lena didn't answer with words. She simply sat down again, placing her fingers gently on the keys. The hall grew silent, so silent she could hear her own heartbeat. She remembered every note of the piece he played earlier. She didn't have sheet music. She didn't need it. The melody had entered her mind the moment he played it, each note resting in her. Memory like steps on a familiar path. She breathed. In, slow, deep, steady dot, and then she pressed. The first key, the sound was clear dot strong dot full of quiet courage. Room held its breath. Lena's fingers rested on the keys for a moment, steadying themselves as if they needed to breathe, just like she did. The room around her was silent, so silent she could hear the soft buzz of a distant light, and even the small shift of someone adjusting their seat. She didn't need to see the audience to know that all eyes were on her. She felt the weight of their attention, their doubt, their curiosity. It pressed onto the air like a heavy blanket. She swallowed gently and allowed her hands to fall into place, guided purely by touch. She didn't rush. She didn't force anything. She let her body settle into the space. Then she let the first note rise down. It floated into the air like a calm whisper, so soft and clean that even the pianist on stage blinked in surprise. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't uncertain. It was delicate but sure, like someone placing their foot on a familiar path. The next notes came right after, and then the next. Each one was exactly where it needed to be. She moved through the melody with the same quiet patience she used when walking down a crowded street, listening and feeling her way forward. Her fingers followed the pattern she had stored in her memory, the same piece the famous pianist had played earlier in the room. But she didn't just repeat it. She felt it. Where he had played with sharpness and precision, she played with warmth. Where he had pushed the keys loudly, she softened them. Where his technique felt strict, hers felt like a breath-smooth, gentle, but clear. She shaped each phrase with emotion, letting her heart speak for her. People leaned forward without realizing it. Even the air felt different. Something about her playing touched the room in a way no one expected. A simple girl, blind since birth, sitting at a grand piano and recreating one of the hardest pieces the pianist had performed that day with no sheet music. No sight, no preparation. The pianist stood still beside her, arms no longer crossed. His eyes narrowed, trying to understand how she was following each shift in the melody with such accuracy. He listened to the way her hands traveled the keys, landing on each note as if they had been trained for years. But he knew, from the short piece she played earlier, that she didn't come from a classical training background. So how was she doing this? Lena didn't know what his face looked like in that moment, but she could sense the change in the room. She felt the tension in the air melt into something else, something closer to awe. The longer she played, the more she relaxed. She stopped thinking about the crowd. She stopped thinking about the cutting words the pianist had thrown at her just minutes ago. She stopped thinking about whether she would be judged. She let herself disappear into the sound. Her fingers traveled from low notes to high ones with fluid movement. There was no hesitation. Even the most difficult passages, with fast jumps and sudden shifts, felt smooth under her touch. She had memorized everything the way she memorized footsteps on familiar paths, by feeling, by sound, by instinct. Someone in the audience let out a soft gasp during one of the trickiest sections. Another person whispered, "How is she doing that?" But Lena didn't hear them. She was too deep in the music to hear anything else. When she reached the final lines of the piece, her hands slowed. The melody softened even more, like a story gently reaching its last sentence. She pressed the final key, letting the sound fade into the stillness, The silence that followed was huge. It wasn't the silence of confusion or hesitation. It was the silence of being stunned. No one clapped yet, because no one knew what to say, what to do, how to react. They were frozen, caught between disbelief and admiration. The pianist was the first to move. He took a slow step toward her, his shoes making a soft sound on the wooden stage. His expression sharp, controlled, proud had shifted to something far more unsettled. He had spent years training, practicing, studying the techniques of great musicians. Yet here was a young woman who had walked onto the stage timidly and reproduced his performance without a single sheet of music. Lina kept her hands still on her lap. She didn't smile. She didn't look up. She only waited. She wasn't sure what he was going to say next. She wasn't even sure she should stay seated. The weight of the moment felt too heavy, too strange. Finally, someone in the audience began to clap. The sound was small at first. A single pair of hands coming together. Then another joined, and another, and then the room erupted. Applause filled the hall like a wave, rising and rising until it became a roar. People stood from their seats without thinking. Some clapped with wide smiles, others with tears in their eyes. A few stood frozen, still too shocked to move. Lina didn't know how big the applause was, but she felt it in her chest. The warmth of it spread through her slowly, like sunlight finally reaching a cold place. She felt her lips tremble slightly, not in fear, but in disbelief. She had never expected this. She had never imagined that people would react so strongly to her playing. She had only wanted to listen, to learn something. She had never planned to be the focus of anything. The pianist lifted his hand slightly, signaling the audience to quiet down. It took a moment, but eventually the applause faded into soft echoes. He looked at Lina. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. For the first time that afternoon, he didn't seem to know what to say. Finally, he managed a few words. How did you do that?" he asked quietly. Lina turned her head slightly toward the sound of his voice. "I just listened," she said softly. He blinked, stunned by the simplicity of her answer. "You listened," he repeated. She nodded. "I heard the piece when you played it earlier, and I remembered it." He stared at her hands, small, gentle hands resting quietly in her lap, and shook his head slowly. "That piece takes months to learn," he said. "Sometimes years to perfect." She didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't trying to compare herself to anyone. "I just felt it," she said quietly. The pianist took a deep breath, and something inside him shifted. The arrogance that once filled his voice faded just a little. His tone softened not much, but enough for people to hear the change. "That was remarkable," he said. The words were simple, but from him they were heavy. They carried meaning. Lina lowered her head slightly in gratitude. She didn't just play it, someone in the audience said. She made it beautiful. Another voice chimed in, better than he did. The pianist stiffened slightly at that comment, but he didn't argue. His silence spoke louder than any defense he could have made. A soft laugh came from somewhere in the back. "Guess she taught the master something today." The pianist exhaled slowly. He didn't smile, but there was a hint of humility in his expression. Lina, unsure of what to do next, began to stand up. She reached for her cane, but before she could lift it, the pianist stepped forward and gently touched the back of her hand. "Wait," he said. The audience fell silent again. He let go of her hand, careful not to startle her, and cleared his throat. "You have a rare gift," he said slowly, as if choosing each word with caution. "One that I have not seen in many years." Lina didn't respond. She didn't know how to. Compliments from strangers made her shy, but this one felt heavier, filled with something deeper. I should not have spoken to you the way I did, he continued. It was wrong of me to judge you before I heard. You. A small gasp went through the crowd. The famous pianist known for never admitting mistakes was apologizing to her on stage in front of everyone. Lena felt the emotion of the moment settle inside her like a soft ache. She didn't need his apology to feel proud of herself, but the sincerity in his voice touched her. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was honest, and that mattered. She nodded slightly. Thank you, she whispered. The pianist looked at the audience and then back at her. Would you play something else? He asked. Lena froze. Something else? Yes, he said. Anything you want. I would like to hear more. His tone was no longer commanding. It was almost gentle. Lena hesitated. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to play another long piece. Her heart was still racing. Her hands were still trembling, slightly from the emotional weight of everything. But the room was waiting. Not with pressure. But with hope. With warmth. With admiration. She sat down once more and placed her fingers on the keys. This time she didn't choose a classical piece. She chose a song she used to play for herself on quiet nights. Something simple, soft, and full of emotion. As the melody began, the room softened again. The music wasn't grand or complex this time. It was gentle, like a soft memory captured in sound. People closed their eyes while listening. Some held their breath. A few rested their hands on their hearts. The pianist watched her closely. Every movement, every note. He wasn't just listening. He was learning. When she finished, the applause rose once more, this time warmer, fuller, more human. Lena stood slowly from the bench, her cane in hand. She wasn't sure what she had changed in that room, but she felt something shift, not just in the audience, but inside the pianist himself. He had watched her. He had listened to her. He had seen her in ways he never expected to. And everything about the moment told her that this was only the beginning of something larger, something none of them could yet understand. Days after the performance felt different for her, almost like the air around her had changed. She could not see the people who suddenly whispered her name in the hallway, or the students who slowed down when they walked past her, but she could sense the shift in their energy. The atmosphere carried a mix of surprise, curiosity, and something else she had not felt from them before: respect. It came in small ways, like how someone would gently move aside when she passed, or how a chair would be pulled out silently for her in the practice room without anyone saying a word. She did not know how to respond to this new attention, so she simply kept moving through her days quietly. She did not want to make a big deal out of anything. She only wanted to practice, to improve, and to live her life without being treated like she was less capable or less human. Music had always been her escape, the one thing that made her feel equal to others. And she was glad that in front of the whole room that night, her skill had finally spoken for her. But the truth was, inside her heart, she still felt a bit shaken. The memory of that moment when the famous pianist had stepped back from the piano and given her a cold, dismissive smile lingered in her mind. She could imagine the shape of his expression, even if she could not see it. She could hear the sound of his breath, sharp and irritated, like her presence had personally offended him. That moment had hurt deeply, because all she had wanted was to play. Still, she remembered the sound of the crowd when she finished. The way the room had gone from laughter to silence, then from silence to applause. That sound had washed away some of the pain, but not all of it. She wondered if the pianist felt the same shift she had felt. She wondered if his thoughts had changed, or if he was still holding on to the same arrogance she had sensed from him. That she found out soon enough. 3 days after the performance, She received a message through one of the school assistants. The assistant gently placed her hand on hers and said there was a letter for her. She opened it slowly, her fingers brushing over the raised ink. It was from the famous pianist. The same man who had humiliated her in front of everyone. Inside the envelope was a short message. The words were simple, but the tone was formal, almost stiff, like he had forced himself to write them. He wanted to meet her. At first, she thought it was a joke. Why would he want to meet her after everything that happened? But the assistant confirmed it. The message was real. The pianist had set a time for their meeting later that week in one of the private rooms near the auditorium. Her heart felt heavy as she folded the note and slid it back into the envelope. She did not know what he wanted. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe he wanted to lecture her. Maybe he wanted to test her again, or even mock her again. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew she had to go. Not because she wanted his approval, but because she needed closure. She needed to face him, to show herself that she was not afraid. When the day came, she walked slowly through the quiet hallway, with her cane tapping gently against the floor. The echoes of her steps felt louder than usual. She reached the door of the private room, took a deep breath, and knocked softly. The door opened almost at once. She could tell he had been waiting. He greeted her, his voice low and polite, but she could hear a hint of discomfort in it. She stepped into the room, feeling the warm air brush against her face. The soft sound of piano notes hung in the background, like someone had been practicing before she arrived. He guided her to a seat, though she did not need help finding it. She could sense the chair's shape and the empty space around it. She sat down quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. He began with words she did not expect. He admitted that he had misjudged her. He admitted that he had acted out of pride. He admitted that he had allowed his reputation and talent to cloud his respect for others. She stayed silent, listening carefully to every word. She could tell that the apology, though sincere, was difficult for him to speak. It was not in his nature to admit mistakes. Then he said something that surprised her even more. He told her that her playing that night had changed him. It had shaken him, challenged him, and humbled him in a way he had not felt in years. He confessed that for the first time in a long while, he had felt like a student again, listening to someone whose talent reached beyond expectations. She did not know what to say. She had played from her heart, not to impress him or anyone else. She had not expected her music to affect him so deeply. He asked her about her training, about how she learned, about how she played without sight. His voice softened as he spoke, filled with curiosity instead of arrogance. She told him the truth, that music came to her like a feeling, like a shape she could hold with her hands, even though she could not see it. She spoke slowly, sharing pieces of her journey, from the first time she touched a piano to the long hours she practiced alone. For the first time since they met, he listened without interruption. She could sense his attention like a warm light, shining directly on her, and he made an offer she never saw coming. He wanted to work with her, not as her instructor, not as her superior, but as her partner in an upcoming performance. A duet, a chance to play together on stage as equals. Her breath caught. She felt her fingers tighten around her cane. A duet with him would mean stepping into the spotlight in a way she had never imagined. It would mean facing the world, not as the girl who had been mocked or underestimated, but as someone standing beside a world-known musician. She asked him why he chose her for such a big performance. He answered honestly. Her music, he said, had a rare honesty. Something pure. Something untouched by pride or fear. Something he had lost long ago. His words touched something inside her, a place she kept hidden even from herself. She remembered the loneliness she carried for so many years. and how she would sit for hours with her hands on the piano keys, wishing that someone would hear her. Really hear her dot, and now someone finally had. She told him she needed time to think. He respected that. He did not pressure her. He simply told her the details of the performance, explained the timeline, and said she could take all the time she needed. When she left the room, she walked slowly through the hallway, her thoughts swirling around her. She felt lighter, but also overwhelmed. Life had changed so fast that she did not know how to hold everything at once. In the days that followed, word spread about the possible duet. She did not understand how the news traveled so quickly, but soon everyone around her was talking. Some people congratulated her. Others looked surprised. Some whispered in disbelief, but she ignored all of it. She spent most of her time in the practice room, running her fingers across the keys, letting the music speak for her. She needed to think, not with her mind, but with her heart. The thought of standing on stage next to the man who had once mocked her felt strange. But the idea of sharing the stage with someone who had finally understood her, music felt different. After 3 long days of thinking, she made her decision. She returned to the private room at the same hour as before. This time, she knocked firmly, without hesitation. When the door opened, he greeted her with a hopeful tone. She smiled softly and told him she would do it. From that moment on, everything began to shift, again this time not because of humiliation, but because of growth, connection, and the possibility of something beautiful. And as they began their first rehearsal together, she could sense that a new chapter of her life had just begun. The first rehearsal for the duet began on a quiet morning when the sun had just begun to warm the tall windows of the practice hall. She arrived early, guided by the familiar pattern of her steps and the sound of her cane tapping lightly on the polished floor. She didn't need to see to know the room was big. The silence inside carried a soft echo, the kind that came only from large, open spaces. She reached the piano and gently touched its wooden frame, feeling the smooth curve that always grounded her. She sat down, letting her fingers rest on the cool keys. Before she played even one note, she breathed slowly, trying to settle her nerves. She wanted to start this new chapter with a clear heart, without the old fear that used to sit heavy inside her. This performance meant more than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just music. It was a chance to rewrite what people thought of her, and maybe what she thought of herself. As she waited, she heard footsteps approaching from across the room. They were firm but slow, like someone deep in thought. She didn't need anyone to tell her who it was. His presence carried a unique energy, confident, calm, and now, after everything that happened, strangely gentle. He greeted her softly, not with the proud tone she had heard the first time they met, but with something close to respect. She returned the greeting, her voice low but steady. She could hear him pulling a chair closer, then the sound of his fingers brushing the keys on the other side of the piano. It felt strange to share the same instrument with him, but not uncomfortable. More like a new space was being created between them. They began with simple scales, played slowly and in sync. She followed the sound of his hands, matching his rhythm with careful intention. At first, it felt awkward. She had grown so used to playing alone, following her own pace, her own heartbeat. Now she had to listen differently, not only to herself but to him. He noticed her hesitation, and without saying a word, adjusted his playing to make it easier for her to follow. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease. She appreciated that he didn't try to lead her too forcefully. He simply made space for her, like duet partners should. After a while, they moved to the main piece they planned to perform. It was a beautiful composition, filled with emotion and contrast. It had moments of softness that felt like warm breath on the skin, and moments of strength that rose like waves crashing against the shore. She ran her fingers across the keys, trying to memorize the pattern of the notes as he guided her through the first lines. He played his part gently at first, giving her space to understand the rhythm. She listened carefully, letting the melody settle inside her. Her fingers began to move, and little by little, the two sides of the piano came alive. The harmony grew stronger with each passing moment. They made mistakes, many of them. Sometimes she entered too early. Sometimes he slowed too much. Sometimes their notes collided in a way that made them both stop and breathe out a small laugh. But it didn't matter. What mattered was how naturally they kept trying, how willingly they learned from each other. He guided her when she needed help, but not in a way that felt controlling. He simply explained things in words she could understand through feeling, through emotion, through how the music should live in the air. His teaching style surprised her. She had expected someone with his reputation to be demanding or strict, but he was nothing like that. Maybe he had changed more than she realized. As days passed, the rehearsals became a routine. They met every afternoon in the same room, where sunlight fell in long lines across the floor, and dust particles floated like tiny stars in the warm air. She arrived early each time, and he always came right on schedule. Their connection deepened in ways she had not expected. They didn't talk much outside of music, but the silence between them often felt full rather than empty. It was as if the piano carried their conversations for them, allowing them to speak in notes instead of words. One day, during a break, he asked her gently how she imagined the piece when she played it. She took a moment before answering. She told him she imagined it like a wide field at night, where the darkness felt soft instead of frightening, and wind moved gently through tall grass. She said the melody made her feel like she was walking barefoot through that field, feeling the earth beneath her feet. He listened quietly. Then he told her how he imagined it, like light breaking through clouds over the ocean. Different images, yet somehow connected. She loved that two people could experience the same music, so differently, yet still make it blend beautifully. The rehearsals continued like this, full of learning and growing. But not everything was easy. There were days when she felt frustrated, when the notes didn't come out the way she wanted. Sometimes her hands trembled with uncertainty, and she worried she wouldn't be good enough for such a big stage. On one of those days, she stopped playing and pulled her hands back from the piano. She stayed quiet for a long moment, trying to steady her breath. He noticed instantly. He didn't push her to continue. Instead, he asked softly, "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, but answered honestly. She told him she was afraid that people would judge her again, that even though the last performance had shocked them, this one might not go the same way. She said she feared her blindness would make things harder, that people would watch her with doubt instead of belief. He listened without interrupting. After she finished, he took a deep breath and said something she would remember forever. He told her that everyone, even the greatest musicians, carried fear inside them. He said that fear did not mean she lacked strength. It meant she cared deeply, and caring was what made music real. Then he told her something even more surprising, that he, too, felt nervous about performing with her. Not because he doubted her skill, but because he wanted to match the honesty she brought into the music. He wanted to play as truthfully as she did, and that pressure sometimes felt heavy. His confession took her breath away. She had never imagined someone like him could feel nervous, especially because of her. In that moment, she felt something shift between them. The wall that had once stood tall and cold was finally gone. Their rehearsals grew smoother from then on. The trust between them strengthened, and their playing became more connected. She could sense his presence beside her like a steady heartbeat. She knew when he was about to slow down or speed up even before he touched the keys. As the performance date grew closer, excitement began to spread through the campus. She heard whispers everywhere she went. Students talked about the duet, about how unusual it was for the famous pianist to share the stage with someone so young and previously unnoticed. Some sounded amazed. Some sounded skeptical. But she ignored all of it. She put all her energy into the music. A day before the performance, they had one final rehearsal. The room was quiet, filled with a late afternoon glow. They played the full piece from start to finish without stopping. The notes flowed beautifully, rising and falling like a story being told. When they reached the last chord, it hung in the air for a long moment before fading. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. They both knew they were ready. After a long silence, he finally said that no matter what happened on stage, he was grateful to be performing with her. His voice carried sincerity that touched her deeply. She thanked him softly, her heart warm and steady. That night, she barely slept. Not because she was scared, but because she felt something huge waiting for her. Something life-changing. She could feel it the way one feels a storm, coming not with dread, but with anticipation, and she was ready. When the morning of the performance arrived, she dressed slowly, making sure her clothes felt comfortable and presentable. Her hands shook a little, but she smiled to herself. It was the good kind of nervousness, the kind that came right before something meaningful. On her way to the auditorium, she could hear people gathering. Footsteps, soft chatter, distant laughter. She walked steadily, her cane tapping lightly. When she reached the backstage area, he was already there, waiting for her. He greeted her warmly, and she felt the calm in his voice. Together, they walked toward the stage entrance dot as she stood behind the curtain. She listened to the crowd settling into their seats. The air felt heavy with expectation. Her heart beat fast, but her hands were steady. The moment had finally arrived, and as the curtain began to rise, she took a deep breath, ready to face the world with music as her guide. The hall was filled with a warm, steady hum, the kind that came from people settling into their seats and whispering softly before a big event. Even though she could not see the audience, she could feel their presence like a soft pressure in the air. Their breaths, their movements, their shifting weight on the chairs, everything told her the room was full, maybe even more packed than the last time she performed there. She stood backstage with her cane in one hand and her other hand, resting lightly on the piano bench beside her. Her heart beat steadily, not too fast, not too slow. It was the kind of calm she had learned only through music, the calm that came right before something important. She took a slow breath, letting it fill her chest before releasing it quietly. The famous pianist stood next to her, not speaking, but she could sense his energy. It was solid and balanced, like he had grounded himself fully before stepping into the spotlight. She felt comfort knowing he was there beside her, not as someone above her, not as someone judging her, but as someone walking the same path in that moment. He leaned slightly toward her and whispered that the stage crew would lift the curtain soon. She nodded, her fingers tightening around her cane. She did not feel fear this time. She felt something heavier, something more meaningful: responsibility, promise, hope. A soft chime echoed through the hall, signaling the start of the performance. The audience quieted immediately. The hush slid across the room like a wave. She felt it move toward her, settling over her skin. The curtain rose. A gentle breeze, stirred by the movement of the curtain, brushed against her face. She stepped forward slowly, guided by the pianist's careful hand on her arm. When they reached the piano, she touched the edge to orient herself, then sat down with practiced ease. She could feel the warmth of the lights above her. Even if she could not see them, their heat told her exactly where the center of the stage was. She adjusted her posture, took a breath, and placed her hands on the cool keys. For a moment, there was silence. Absolute, complete silence. A silence that held 1,000 eyes, 1,000 expectations. Then they began to play. The first notes floated gently into the air, soft as morning light. The pianist started with a calming melody, steady and warm, like a guiding hand. She followed his lead, her fingers moving in a smooth line across the keys. The familiar rhythm settled inside her, grounding her, reminding her of the days they spent practicing together. As they moved into the next section, she took the lead. Her hands flowed confidently, shaping the melody with emotion she had stored deep inside her. She played for the younger version of herself, the girl who used to sit alone in a quiet room, wishing she could share her music with the world. She played for every moment she had doubted herself. And she played for every person who had ever believed in her quietly. The audience stayed silent, but not the uncomfortable kind of silence. It was the breath-held, heart-stilled kind. She could feel their attention wrapped around the notes like a warm blanket. She listened closely to the pianist as he followed her lead. Their music blended beautifully, weaving together like threads of a single story. She could sense his shifts when he softened, when he pushed a little harder, when he lifted the melody gently for her to carry. Halfway through the performance, the music swelled into a powerful section. She played with full emotion, letting her hands fall deeply into the keys, creating a rich, full sound that spread across the hall. She felt the vibrations through the bench, through her body, through the air around her. When they reached the quiet ending, the music softened again. The final notes were gentle, almost like a whisper. She held the last chord for a long moment, letting it fade slowly. Then the hall erupted. The applause hit her all at once, like a wave of warm air. People clapped loudly, some cheering, some calling out in joy. She didn't have to see their expressions to know what they felt. The sound carried everything she needed to understand respect, admiration, gratitude. For a moment, she felt overwhelmed. The sound washed over her in a rush, and she fought the sudden sting in her eyes. She breathed through the emotion, forcing herself to stay steady. Beside her, the pianist placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. He leaned down and whispered a soft, "Well done." His voice carried genuine pride, the kind that came from someone who had been changed by her, someone who had grown because of her. When the applause continued, he slowly stood up and reached out to guide her to her feet. But before they bowed, he took a step toward the microphone at the front of the stage. The hall quieted again. He began to speak, his voice loud yet calm, carrying across the room with clarity. He told the audience that tonight's performance wasn't just a duet. It was a moment of learning, a moment of realization, a moment of transformation. He admitted that he had once misjudged the girl standing beside him. He said that he had been blinded not by lack of sight, but by pride, by assumption, by ego. He told them that she had taught him something no one else had taught him in years, that true music came from honesty, from feeling, from courage. The room stayed silent as he spoke. She could feel every heart in the hall listening. When he finished, he stepped aside and took her hand gently. He lifted it in the air, a gesture that felt like light spreading across her chest. The applause returned, louder than before. Some people stood. She could hear their chairs moving, their hands clapping in powerful rhythm. She bowed deeply, not because she felt she had achieved something extraordinary, but because she felt grateful for the chance to prove herself, grateful for the music that guided her, grateful for the people who finally saw her for who she truly was. After the performance, they stepped off the stage together. Backstage was filled with warm voices, light footsteps, and a rush of excitement. Many people approached her to congratulate her. She listened to their words with a shy smile, thanking them softly. The pianist stayed close, guiding her when the space grew crowded. Every once in a while, he would lean toward her and quietly check if she was all right. She nodded each time, feeling safe, seen, and valued. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the hall had begun to empty, they sat together on the stage's edge. The room felt huge and peaceful, the seats stretching into soft silence. He told her that this performance was only the beginning. He said he wanted to continue working with her, not as a mentor, but as a partner. He believed she had a gift that needed to be shared with the world. She listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She felt a sense of calm wash over her. For so long, she had feared being underestimated, ignored, or misunderstood. Now, the world finally heard her. Not because she demanded it, but because her music spoke louder than any words she could ever say. She thanked him again, her voice soft but steady. She told him that she was grateful, not only for the opportunity, but for the respect he had shown her. Respect she had once thought she would never receive from someone like him. Not as they prepared to leave the hall. She ran her fingers gently across the piano one more time. The smooth keys felt familiar, comforting. This instrument had carried her through loneliness, through fear, through humiliation, and now, through triumph. She walked out of the hall, guided by the sound of her cane tapping rhythmically on the floor. She could feel the cool night air on her skin, refreshing and full of promise. Her life had changed forever, and though she could not see the world around her, she felt it opening up wide, welcoming, and full of possibilities she had only ever dreamed of. In that moment, she knew one truth clearly. She had found her place, not because someone gave it to her, but because she claimed it with her music, her strength, and her unshakable belief in herself. A new journey awaited her, and she was ready to walk into it, one steady step at a time.